What are Democrats and Republicans doing in preparation for 2026? Dave Weigel is a political reporter at Semafor, and he joins the podcast to discuss the parties and the 2026 midterms. How are Democrats grappling with their downturn? What are the baseline conditions going to be like in terms of anti-incumbent feeling and the state of the economy? What impact will gerrymandering have? And what are the issues that Democrats want to focus on for the midterms? And what are the issues that Republicans want to focus on for the midterms? We discuss all of that and more. It's a great conversation. Dave is a very insightful guy, and I'm glad we got him on the podcast. As always, thank you for listening. We appreciate you very much. And if you want to support the New Liberal podcast, the best way to do that is by becoming a member of the Center for New Liberalism. You know the drill. You can do that at cnliberalism.org/become a member. If you've been on the fence, if you've been thinking about it for a while, if you've heard this message before, jump in, give it a try. There's a great community. You can get involved in local politics, get involved in organizing, or just get access to bonus episodes of this podcast. Either way, we appreciate all our members. Thank you for listening one more time, and enjoy the episode. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the New Liberal podcast, part of the Center for New Liberalism. I'm your host, Jeremiah Johnson, and joining me this episode is Dave Weigel. Dave, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here. Thank you very much.
So today we're talking about the 2026 midterms. It's, more than a year out, but the nature of our political machine is such that it's never really too early to be talking about this kind of thing. And I think a good place to start would be just kind of at a baseline expectation. What do we think the national environment will be like? Because there's a ton of things we can talk about. We can talk about regional trends. We can talk about particular issues. We can talk about, gerrymandering and particular races. And there's an infinite amount of detail we can get into, right? But the big thing that's going to set all the expectations is just basically, what is the national environment? Is it pro-Trump? Is it pro-Democrats? Is it something else? So what do you see as somebody who's very, very plugged into kind of the political moment and the trends and the currents? What are your expectations for, mid 2026? How are voters going to be feeling? How's the voting public what's the mood going to be?
Oh man, that's the hardest way to ask in some ways, because I don't know what the issues are going to be next year. I know we know more about what the most motivated part of the electorate's going to look like, and that's going to be Democratic. I'm happy to look at recent history of the last 7 months, but before that, just Democrats since Trump entered the scene. Democrats now have a political base that shows up for everything, highly engaged. Turns out in special elections, turns out in midterms. The expectation of both parties is that's going to continue. So that Democrats start with their 2024 vote. There's more people who voted Republican last year who are going to fall off. And a lot of Republicans' effort is just convincing them you have to come out and vote. They're in interesting ways, in ways that I'm still understanding from day to day, because there are stories that to me don't look obviously like a political story or a midterm story, but are part of this Republican effort to just get those people invested.
Well, and this is new, right?
Yeah.
This is new. We're
this is new.
But no, it's like Democrats have always thought high turnout benefits us. We are the high turnout party. We are the party of the underrepresented and the people who feel disenfranchised. And now I guess it's probably a result of education polarization.
Yeah.
But now Democrats are all these high education, high conscientiousness people who show up to vote even in local and midterm elections. And Republicans, the MAGA base is if Trump's not on the ballot, I'm not showing up, so.
Yes, and there's those voters. There are those voters. There are also the people that came into Trump as they expanded the coalition with a bunch of promises that they're frankly not going to fulfill. So the one that I point to the most is free IVF. Was that a huge constituency for Trump? It's pretty anecdotal. There are women who might have otherwise stayed home or might have been convinced to vote for Kamala Harris, and he said, "I'm doing free IVF," and Democrats didn't say that, and they said, "All right, well, I'm with this free IVF." They're probably not coming back because he's not going to do that. And then for other issues, yeah, this expansion, probably the most well covered. I guess what are the most well covered aspects of his 2024 coalition? The gains with non-white voters and the gains with young men. Both of those groups, he's not delivering on some of their immediate needs. But you can see this and there's a danger of over indexing on podcasts, but you can see this on the Andrew Schultz discussions of how they thought Trump was going to bring free speech back, and instead he's getting students deported for criticizing Israel. Those people are less engaged. There are just more people falling off the coalition. Who is falling off the Democratic coalition? Well, there are people who think the party sucks, but they've not responded to that by saying they're not going to vote for Democrats. The most critical types are the ones who sat out the election or made some strategic choice because of Gaza. They're not happy with Trump either. So I'm painting a fairly rosy picture for Democrats. And I don't think it's that rosy for them because we're talking about not just demographics, but a subsection of that. What have Democrats done to gain back people? Really, they've tried many things over a decade. And nothing's worked. We're talking about how the base has changed. How the base has changed over time. How they were this way under Obama, they're this way under Trump. One thing that has happened is that just Democrats don't need much delivered for them, and they don't know what deliveryism, I think we would call it on social media. They don't know what you deliver to voters against their votes. They really don't. So when you talked about the turnout, I had a voice in my head of Bernie Sanders throughout his 2016 campaign, throughout 2020, saying, if we have a high voter turnout, we'll win. Democrats win when there's a high voter turnout. The assumption there is that you need to just keep saying you're going to do positive things for the working class, and they're going to say, oh gosh, I didn't realize Democrats believed in that, and they'll turn out and vote for you. Democrats did a lot of what Bernie Sanders recommended in the Biden years. He didn't recommend inflation, but he recommended direct payments and things like that. Recommended student loan forgiveness, et cetera, et cetera. Didn't really get them anything. And so that's this is why the midterm is not really about anything so far, because if Democrats, and I was with Alyssa Slotkin in Michigan last week, she proposed a couple ideas. One of them was no benefits for large companies that don't give health care to their employees. And she thought that was a good populist idea. I saw people whack at it online, and I haven't seen much discussion about it otherwise, because really there's this hand-wringing that is based on something very real for Democrats, that nothing seems to convince people not to vote for Republicans. And let me give Republicans some agency here. They really have become, Democrats resent when they're referred to as a more working-class party, but the old pre-Trump party would not have a tariff agenda. It would not have an agenda that's explicitly designed, I should say, to reduce foreign imports, increase American manufacturing. Will it work is one question, but that as a premise for the entire party, when George Bush did this with steel, it was kind of controversial.
Yeah.
Among Republicans. The Republican Party now is entirely built around Donald Trump's attempt to remake the economy around what he thought it should be made around 40 years ago. I mean, they're still hangover of like, we got to beat Japan when he talks about this stuff.
Yeah, there's a couple interesting things in there where, like, 20 years ago, conservatives would have been yelling at you like, name one country that's ever taxed itself into wealth.
Yes.
And they think that would be like a great dunk line. And now they're all about,
well, it's a great place to start, Raw. Let's try it. Maybe American people can be the one.
Yeah, and now they're all about tariffs. But the broader question that you're talking about here of deliverism and the Democrats is really interesting, because it really was tested in the sense of, like, there's this theory that if you do big things, if you make big promises and follow up on them, voters will reward you for that. And the Biden administration, whatever else you think about them, passed a lot of big bills. I think like 4 different bills on the order of $1 trillion or more. And they did a lot of things for a lot of groups. And like the most paradigm setting version of this is that they, bailed out the Teamster Union. They bailed out their pension fund to the tune of many, like, tens of billions of dollars. And the Teamsters Union responded by mostly backing Trump and refusing to back Biden, and their head went to speak at the GOP convention. And it's just like, it seems like deliverism is kind of dead, that the alternative theory is that voters punish you for doing things, even if they're big things or they're good things that they say they want. In general, the voting public punishes you. Like, that's why they call it spending political capital. It's because it actually costs you something, right?
Yes, that was the idea. And to what degree did Gaza screw this stuff up? I think I'm sorry for spending so much time in the Biden period, but it really did, because the Biden approach, which would have surprised people who followed his career 20 years earlier, was to listen to progressives who, both in the primary strategically, Elizabeth Warren made a decision to help out Biden and encourage him to staff his administration with her allies. Bernie, once he conceded the nomination, got people on the platform committee. Progressives were part of the Biden conversation and Biden policymaking very early on, and not in the most prominent role sometimes, but throughout Lena Khan, let's now agree, is one of the most famous members of the administration. That was from the Warren world. So, but Biden governed as a more progressive president than anyone was expecting. And you can time capsule some stuff from 2022 and find people saying on the left saying, yes, at least he's not delivering some of these. There's the more malcontent progressives who's angry that he didn't somehow convince Joe Manchin to get a $15 minimum wage through. I think there's legitimate anger what happened to the public option. The answer for that stuff is, okay, there's stuff we can't pass in Congress, but we passed as much as we could. And on the executive branch, we did everything we could. And then Gaza completely wrecks that. It's such a omni-cause for the left. I think omni-cause is usually used as pejorative, but I think it's useful and accurate here. I was just at Netroots Station where members of Congress were saying every cause is connected. We're fighting for the same things in America they're fighting for in the Congo and Palestine. I was like, okay, well, if that's a lot of people. Now, did they all withhold their votes? Not really, but you had a very angry progressive base of the party after it had gotten through a lot of what it could under Joe Biden. Let's say more than they could get under Barack Obama. And I saw this with Bernie Sanders. He was campaigning for Biden through the end. He campaigned to an extent for Harris. His argument was this had been a progressive administration, the most progressive administration since LBJ. He would often say FDR. And we need to keep that in charge with a majority so it can do more. And his argument after the election turned into Democrats didn't do anything for the working class. And Harris listened too much to wealthy people. And there's a little bit of self-preservation there, but the part of it that I think is complicating for the left is there just hasn't been any analysis. It's still, after a lot of ideas were tried, that their ideas have not been tried. Mm-hmm. For the rest of the party, I end up being somewhat defensive of the rest of the party because they often get nicked for things they didn't really do. They weren't out there they made a fatal mistake in defending Biden too long. But their theories of what could go over, they are over-consulted. They are obsessed with ideas that will work for everyone in the room and won't get you a negative story or a negative analysis from the Center for a Responsible Federal Budget. They're less bold than Republicans, but they didn't really have anything they could say, we found this works either. This is ideological is not the right word. In terms of the party's self-definition, this is the weakest they've been since 1980. After Jimmy Carter lost. And it took them a while to confront how much the interests of their voters, their diehard voters, diverge from the voters they'd lost. I'm saying all this, hopefully not being obvious, because I don't have here's the solution to this. I think what's been happening recently for Democrats is that in the absence of compelling Democratic leadership, Republicans with a much stronger command of the media infrastructure than they've ever had just kind of take the craziest thing they see online, throw it against the wall, and say that's the Democrats. And that's what's been happening. So no one in the party has a solution to this, that they now have to answer for what a celebrity says or what somebody on TikTok says. Or I saw this today from Republican
My favorite example of this is I'm actually collecting these because I'm writing an article about this, but
Oh, good, 'cause it's a real thing.
it's the Sydney Sweeney thing. It's the sorority dances
Yes.
where somebody will, the rush talk thing where there's a group of college girls who do a big dance.
Mhm.
It's to attract people to join their sorority, and somebody will just some conservative account that's like Gunter Eagle Man USA will post the sorority dance of a bunch of it's like conventionally attractive young white women at a sorority in the South. Liberals are outraged by this. America is back, and like it's in search of liberals who are outraged, and if they're not outraged, then we'll just say it anyway, and we'll invent it's a whole thing. There's an industry around this.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing for you to look after and a good analysis of it, because it's always this tactic in conservative media has worked for a long time. I'm old enough to remember Ward Churchill, the University of Colorado professor, who said some things about 9/11 that people disagreed with. Let me just get out of that segment without getting further into it. And became this household name after the 2004 election just because Fox decided to beat him up, and Bill O'Reilly in particular. This is still, I mean, from Edward R. Murrow's ability to freeze the news around something he's interested in. Lots of hosts have that. Like, it's less and less, but podcasters have that too. And so let's maybe assert that those were finding targets that actually could do some damage to people 4 or 5 years ago. When if conservative media was angry about some woke policy that was leading people to get suspended for their job. I don't want to be too generic about this, but it started. What were the first targets of this in the newer media? Elon buys Twitter way. It was libs of TikTok going after liberal teachers and saying this is the crazy liberal gender stuff that your kids are being taught. And even in the most unsympathetic analysis, all right, there are teachers, they are teaching things. There are parents who might not want their kids to know this stuff in class. That's a political debate. It has moved on from that. As Democrats, I think, have gotten a bit more ashamed of their left and unwilling to defend things. It's moved on to that, just random people. And I tried not to write about the Sydney Sweeney thing, that I did write something, and I'm kicking myself before I write more, because I think that's the story, is just Democrats are defined by whoever Republicans want to define them. And sometimes it's a Ram Amdani, it's somebody who actually wins an election, but often it's just not. And what does the party do? Do they put out a platform and say, hey, we're against this ad? Well, what do you do every day? It's a real challenge for them.
Well, so let me turn it back towards 2026, because there's a couple ideas here, and I think we can translate them.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this problem of, Republicans are often able to define what the story should be. And even if it's not a real story, even if it's, some random elementary school teacher in Oregon said one crazy thing and now it's going to be a national story, or it's Sydney Sweeney, it's whatever. You can define what the story is, because conservative media is very strong and very powerful right now and very good at driving narratives. But there are some indications that some of this is getting away from Republicans and from Trump specifically. And I'm thinking specifically about the Epstein story, which is something that he can't seem to dodge. That, the Republican base is all about protecting children, and it's a conspiratorial base. And he can't seem to get out of the fact that his name is somewhere in the Epstein files. And like, he's tried to tell people to shut up about it. And even the right-leaning media won't. And so, number one, I think there may be some turnabout to this, and maybe it's just maybe it's just what naturally happens when you have unified control of government. It's much harder to make it all about the other team and what the other guys are saying, because you control everything. So ultimately, if bad things happen, it's going to come down to you.
Sure.
And my theory of 2026 right now, and you can feel free to tell me how I'm wrong or how this is an oversimplification, is that there's always backlash to the administration. The midterms usually go poorly for the kind of controlling party that's in power. And on top of that, Democrats are the more highly educated. They turn out in midterms better. Trump's base in both 2018 and 2022 did not really turn out as much as was expected in those midterms. And so my kind of expectation for 2026 is, despite kind of the challenges that Democrats face, they are still kind of the favorites, at least to retake the House, to win the the House popular vote. And I think my big question is, in detail, if the environment is like D+5 or something like that, what does that actually mean for the results in the House? How does that translate based on the individual races, based on gerrymandering, based on a bunch of other stuff? I guess the questions are, number one, is this diagnosis accurate? Number two, what does it mean in terms of what the actual results would be?
Glad that you put it that way, who will win the popular vote, etc. Because something I wrote about last week is the overall Republican theory of governance right now is that progressives are dangerous. The degree to which this is danger comes from ideological blindness or for just like nihilism is uncertain. You can't let them get their hands on things, and so maps should reflect this by making cities less relevant in the House, splitting them up to whatever extent possible. You can, I guess, get the Supreme Court to take another look at Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act and get rid of racial gerrymandering. Just how can you reduce the number of Democrats that get elected, even with the same vote count? So that is a unknown question and answer, because Texas hasn't acted yet. Other states haven't acted yet. You have some idea of this because you can look at Tennessee and what happened when Republicans decided to eliminate Nashville's House and Congress. You have actually three, but members of Congress who represent parts of Nashville, and they're all very Republican. They all hate the city, and they all basically are trying to undermine the city. They like the idea of dechartering it. I'm not going to. This is a newer idea that I think all of them have not jumped on yet. But generally, yes, the idea is Republicans should be in charge of things because look what happens when liberals run them. And this is a storyline that I think all Democrats are thinking about, including Zoran Amdani. When I talked to him in New York, he kept bringing up Bernie Sanders and how you need the Bernie Sanders in Burlington example is what you need. You need a progressive mayor, a socialist mayor who makes things so much better that people say, I guess I like socialists now. That's their goal. The more liberal wing of the party's goal is not to let those guys get elected because they think that won't happen. They think it'll be another Brandon Johnson. What does this mean for the House map? Yeah, so TBD the House map. We don't know what it's going to look like because the goal is taking these suburbs and, to a lesser extent, excerpts that have been trending Democratic and making it very hard for them to vote for a Democrat. So even if there was some slide back to the Democratic Party, for example, in Texas, which shifted to the right last year from 2020, even if it slid back a little bit, it wouldn't matter because Plano's is not going to get to vote for a Democrat. That's the idea what they're doing. Beyond the Democrats' ability to fix any of their problems or be more compelling, that's the Republican goal. Make it so that they can't elect so many people. And yeah, Texas is going to act in some capacity. Missouri is threatening to get rid of the Kansas City seat. Indiana is threatening to get rid of the Gary seat. What does that do? Florida acts too. What if they try to erase 10 Democratic seats around the country? Democrats respond by trying to erase 5 Republican seats. All right, that's marginally much harder to flip the House over for Democrats. And what does the party do to compete in those districts? That, I think, is the hardest question to answer, because if you were just playing a RPG or something, and you would move dials and say, okay, well, this district went from -5 Trump to +5 Trump. This candidate must adjust his positions so that he's more appealing to Trump voters. Democrats just don't do that. There's no Democrat who's saying, now that I'm in a tougher district, I'm going to vote with Republicans on, let's say, the women's sports measure. They just don't. They're a very unified party, and people know they are. Even abortion, which there used to be discrepancies inside the party, not really anymore, not since Dobbs. They're just a pro-life party, or sorry, pro-choice party generally. You'll lose 2 guys in the House unless.
And this is despite pretty strong evidence that this kind of thing works. Like if you look at who actually can win, Trump +5 or Trump +7 districts, it's people in the House like Jared Golden, like Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez, like Mary Peltola did in Alaska. Like these are all people who have heterodox positions. And yeah, if you're a progressive, they're probably going to piss you off with some of their votes. But, it seems like a really like an own goal to not be able to recognize, well, yeah, maybe Mary Peltola makes me angry 2 to 3 times a year, but I'd rather have her than a Republican, even as a deep progressive. Like, the fact that the party's not good at running those kind of candidates is a problem. And like, I'm a partisan. I'm an ideological partisan. I want the Democrats to win. And so like this really worries me.
Yes, and I would add to that only that the power of groups to punish Democrats for moving off the reservation seems to be diminishing. It's hard to track this and prove it. But one thing I've been talking about with a couple Democratic strategists, because they say, how come my client's getting different treatment than the other client, is you've started to see, I just keep going to gender stuff because it's the one that I think Democrats have thought the least about relative to what their position is. You've seen a couple Democrats get asked, okay, transports question, where are you at? And some of them have started to say, well, we all agree, Gavin Newsom, Pete Buttigieg, well, there are fairness issues. And I've talked to Democrats off the record on this, and they said, yes, we've learned we need to actually, this is Democrats talking, that we need to acknowledge that this is a problem for some people, and we can't just say they're terrible bigots. And 2 years ago, that would lead to condemnation from Human Rights Campaign, from Christopher Street Projects, nowhere, a constellation of groups to say this person is anti-gay, and maybe a story in The Advocate, or another, or them, or a LGBT news site that says this Democrat's throwing under the bus. And I was just at a progressive conference where there was a fear that Democrats were going to quote unquote throw them under the bus. So that still happens, but the mechanism for getting them out of the party is that you have to run a primary candidate against them. And I've not seen much fear that among Democrats they're going to lose. Seth Moulton has a primary challenger who is a member of the LGBT community, I think defined as asexual or trans. And this person, I think most people noticed this was when this person sent out a fundraising message that included all of their identifications. But basically, a member of the LGBT community who's saying
They have a lot of identifiers, identifiers.
I didn't want to get myself into the trap of saying what they all were and getting one wrong. But somebody who's just divergent from, was not like a cis male, and saying, I'm running against Seth Moulton. And you've not seen Seth Moulton quake in terror of that. You've not seen a bunch of money marshaled against these people. You did even 2 years ago in Texas. There was a Democrat who voted with Republicans on a omnibus anti-gender surgery bill, and money stirred up to get her out of the party, to beat her in the primary. She lost, and then she became a Republican. I've not seen that happening the same way. So this Democrats are aware there's less enforcement if they move off of what the base says. The thing is, they believe it. Democrats, in my experience, by and large, think, and they agree that there's such a thing as gender separate from sex. They think Republicans are being terrible and mean and bullying and abusive when they roll back laws that limits young people's access to puberty blockers, etc. They believe all this stuff. They're not running for office saying I'm going to break away from this, or the sports issue. They also believe that. But they find that if they say something off book, it's not that bad for them. And the other thing that the ones who've been the majority know is there are fewer tests like this if your party has a majority, because if Hakeem Jeffries is leader of the House, he's not going to be putting all those sorts of bills, these culturally divisive bills, on the floor and seeing who votes against them. They don't come up. When Republicans didn't run the House, there was no Protect Women's Sports bill introduced, period. I guess introduced, but not scheduled and put on the floor. So it's just easier to protect your party culturally if you're in power. On the way there, it's gotten a little bit easier to have people run on something a bit more heterodox than they might run on in Oakland or New York City. But again, everything I describe is here's what's going on, and have Democrats figured out how to use that effectively politically yet? Not really. Like, there's not many examples of Democrats navigating this and saying, I'm going to break from the most unpopular parts of my party. Immigration is probably a better example, because when I asked Democrats about it, you've started to see Democrats move away from the idea that every non-citizen who wants asylum should get asylum. And they've started to say, well, we need immigration reform that's based on economic needs. And that would have been a right-wing position 5 years ago. It's now becoming a more mainstream Democratic position. And the groups involved in that don't have a lot of credibility because the same groups are putting out polls saying that Kamala Harris is going to do fine with Latinos, and then she did worse than any Democrat in 20 years, I should say. And so those groups in this conversation, there is this back and forth is important where Democrats exist, issue groups exist, advocacy groups. Democrats do something, advocacy groups respond, and then the media covers the controversy. That's just happening less. And I'm in the media and I write stories about it, but you can tell just they're people are not catching everything that goes over the net.
There's nothing like being out of power and having Donald Trump doing stuff to just unify everybody on the Democratic side and to get them to shut up yelling at each other and to all start yelling in the same direction. It's the great unifying force is watching Donald Trump destroy various parts of the federal government and society that they care about.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the Epstein story. The thing there with Democrats is they've made this calculation that Trump clearly is nervous about it. Two, that there are people in his base, and let's call them like the podcast electorate, the ones who didn't vote for him in the past, but said this guy's awesome and he's going to change everything and he's going to get the pedophiles exposed. They don't care if there's any splashback on their party. One, they don't expect it. Two, you've seen from James Comer runs oversight. Their big idea is we're going to put Bill Clinton on the stand. Yeah, Democrats don't care. That's fine. They're not out there campaigning every day with Bill Clinton. They're
Is this 1998? Like it's so weird to me that we're in 2025 and like it's still a Republican go-to. Like let's bring up the Clintons again. Like has Gen Z do they even know who Bill Clinton is to some extent? Like I don't know. This just seems very very odd to me. Like
it's a complicated question because he was off the bench, or actually on the bench for Democrats, really from 2017 to 2020, let's say 4. And my old colleague Lisa Larry had a good story in the Times about 2018. He was just off the trail, even in Arkansas. I think in Arkansas he did 1 or 2 events, but when the party had its Me Too reckoning, part of that was, all right, we had Bill Clinton, let's get away from him. He only really came back because Kamala Harris scrambled the jets and got every Democrat who could to campaign for her and needed validators saying, hey, she's not that left wing. I'm a Democrat who's not that left wing and I like her and I think she's good. So he came back for that, but he raises money for Democrats. But my point here is that Democrats are not worried about the effects of an Epstein investigation on their party. And they are for other issues that even the immigration or the mobilization of federalization, I should say, of police in D.C., Democrats have their opinion on it, but they're also worried about political backlash from people who say, "I don't care if this is looks like something from a movie." And I read a book about how militarizing the police is bad. I'm seeing on TV that DC is dangerous, and I want people to fix this. They're arguing often with people who are just engaging with these stories at the level of people watching TV or reading their phones, and they're willing to believe that something bad is Democrats' fault. The Epstein story doesn't do that. So it's been very unifying for them, and you can see the degree to which Republicans are trying to just move to something else because everything else is easier for them to explain and fight over.
yeah. So I've got a question for you here because a lot of what we've been talking about, like the last half hour, has been focused around this issue or that issue. And there's kind of this question of like, oh, well, the Democrats would prefer if we were talking about this, this, and this the whole time, and that would be to their benefit. Republicans would very much like the election to be about that instead. But it's all very like media narrative based, and it's all based around, communication channels and strategies. And that certainly is going to be a part of this. But when it comes to 2026, the other thing that matters is just what are the facts on the ground? Like, how is society doing? How is the economy doing? And I'll use the example of something that hit Democrats really hard in the last 4 years, which is, Joe Biden did a lot of stuff and he tried to message around a lot of stuff. But the bare fact that couldn't be danced around was that inflation hit like a 30-year high under Joe Biden.
Mm-hmm.
You can debate how much of that was his fault, how much of it was beyond his control, but it was a bare economic fact about the world.
Mm-hmm.
And another fact about the world was that all the biggest cities in America are run by Democrats. And in 2020 and 2021 and 2022, they had giant increases in crime and public disorder and like visible homelessness. And you can, how much of this is any particular person's fault? You can try to assign blame or not assign blame as your ideology desires. But like, it is a fact about the world that there was more public disorder and that inflation was way too high. And like, no matter what message Democrats used, it was very hard to get away from that.
Yeah.
And I wonder about how that's going to play out in 2026. Republicans and Democrats can both position their messaging and talk about different issues. But, if Trump's tariffs have slowed down economic growth, if job growth is anemic or even negative, if inflation is high because, your groceries are now more expensive because we're putting tariffs on agricultural stuff from Mexico, like, the question here is how much, can messaging just get you away from the actual bare facts on the ground? And how much of it is just, well, if Trump's tariffs lead us back to 5-6% inflation, then he's just screwed no matter what?
Well, I think it's a lot of the latter. If people, what do Democrats say are the reasons Trump won the election? Some of them will say, oh, we lost on some cultural issues and need to figure that out. The answer TBD, which has been not very compelling, as I was talking about. And then he promised to lower prices. He's not lowering prices. Everything he does that's not lowering prices is a failure. And that's another area they're pretty comfortable. Trump does have, and I'm not trying to privilege his ability to do this because it's lying. It's what it is. Trump has this ability to just claim that things are getting better when they're not, and have that transmitted to his base, and his base will repeat that. For example, the clearest example really is him just saying that gas is $2 in a lot of states, and it's not. He's not ever said what states they're $2 in. No reporter has followed up and asked what states they're $2 in. No one living in these states has found the $2 gas. Could it fall? Sure. But the overall Trump policy, or strategy is not policy, is just to say things are better. And yeah, you might ask, oh, didn't Joe Biden try that? I don't know why. It's just less convincing when Joe Biden says it than on Trump. But part of this is Democrats are just, it's hard to get them all invested in sharing an economic message that they can't back up. They just are, I think, more worried about being dishonest in an interview and being called out for it than a lot of Republicans are. And I'm not trying to be too harsh on Republicans, but you've just seen this and a lot of defenses of what Trump is doing, of them saying things are better. Wait, the data says they're not. The data says.
I mean, this is the new liberal podcast.
Yes.
This is the new liberal podcast. You can be as harsh on Republicans as you want. Like, part of this is that Democrats are, again, kind of the expertise class. This is the elite class.
Yes.
This is the highly educated people now, so they're uncomfortable with lying. Part of it is just that Donald Trump individually is kind of a sociopath, and he's fully comfortable with lying about anything and everything forever. Like, it's not a permanent feature of the Republican Party, but it's a feature right now because of him.
It is a feature that, let's say, J.D. Vance is less comfortable doing. You not hear J.D. Vance out there making those claims. He's much, for example, last week when Trump fires the BLS commissioner, the same day before that, what J.D. Vance was doing is saying, actually, the numbers produced by BLS for this quarter show that the foreign-born worker population has decreased, and that means our policies are working. So that was a less compelling message than actually the economy is great and the data people are rigging it. But he's much more comfortable saying, I can prove this to you than Trump just making stuff up. And I'm very comfortable saying this. Trump makes stuff up. I mean, it's you've seen this with his judicial nominees. They just have to, when they're asked something by Democrats, like, did Joe Biden win the 2020 election? They have to use this Gish Gallop legalese to not say yes in their questionnaires because Trump doesn't want them to say yes. Yeah, no one else makes these demands on people. I think even the stuff I was talking about with gender, there's not enforcement saying, you must say that there is no biological difference between men and women. It's like the Democrats are working through how to talk through that. There's not an edict that they all must follow. So that makes it, in the period we're talking about right now, in the first 7 months of administration, when people had optimism about Trump, that's helped that he could just beast his way out of these conversations. If you're another Republican, well, you're going to be explaining, you already know, you're going to be explaining your tax cuts. You're going to be claiming any benefit you can, finding, let's say, normal person who benefited from not having to assess their tip wage, pay a tax on it at the end of the year. You're going to get people who have Medicaid and say, see, Medicaid's still here and it's stronger now because we're kicking non-citizens off it. You know what you're going to run on, but it's harder for you to just make stuff up than it is for Trump to do it. And if they just run around the country saying, actually, Trump, let's say inflation is higher and unemployment's a little bit higher, and you have a year of young people coming out of college, who are not the most likely voters, but they're more likely voters than people who didn't go to college, saying, I can't find a job right now. That is harder for a lot of people to spin. And I am saying here that Democrats' best, this is true of any out of power party, Democrats' best options are all waiting for Republicans to screw things up. I think they are in trouble if things are not screwed up, if the economy is quite robust. This cheat code Republicans have found where you can brag about how much money you're making in tariffs because they're not called taxes. I don't think the Democrats have gotten through that thicket yet. They need people to be pissed off about tariffs, because this is what one thing, I keep doing tangents, but hopefully they're interesting. One reason that Republicans have long opposed the government filling your taxes out for you, the experiment that Biden tried and Republicans just got rid of, is because they believe taxes are less popular when they're transparent. You get a bill that says, here's how much you paid and here's how much is in taxes. That is more angering to you than a bill that just bakes the taxes in and doesn't tell you. And so what they're doing with tariffs is incorporate that lesson. You're not going to the store and the bill does not say that you're paying $1,100 for this washing machine and $200 of that is in tariffs. No, they're not saying that. So they figured out a way to say that the economy is being balanced with no cost to you, the consumer. It's all going to pan out, and all the worst projections of this is going to be bad are not happening. And if you're not right now getting laid off, if you're doing okay, that's pretty credible. Nothing bad has happened to you yet. I think there was some panic at the start of Liberation Day. You saw this reflected in the stock market of people saying, I better buy these goods before they're tariffed. And who knows what these companies are going to do. Once that stops, yes, it's a less panicking environment. And compare this to when Republicans had to come back from the wilderness in 2009, the economy was really bad. Everyone agreed it was really bad. The administration tried to say that we were going to turn a corner in recovery summer 2009. We started to recover a little bit, but not that much. And Republicans just got to run on how the economy sucked. That's much easier than what they've given Democrats to react to, because the economy, one, is not that bad, and two, the negative externalities are hard to see. They're harder to see than here's a bill being sent to your door for how much you now have to pay South Korea for this product.
Yeah, I mean, if Democrats were smart, I think they would be going all in on stories of small business people whose small businesses are struggling or closing because of tariffs, and I see some of this, but I think it would behoove them to highlight, there's a knife manufacturer who I saw who was like, oh, I thought it was great because my custom knives are made in America and my competition is like Japanese knives, and now I'm going to be doing great. But it turns out he sources all his machines and his raw materials from another country, and they're getting tariffed, and now he might go out of business. And I don't know, maybe this is all a very complicated thing, but you show a picture of a sad working class man in a factory who says, my little factory is going out of business because of tariffs. I don't know.
You need the actual factory to go to business, I think, for something to happen. And the Democrats I've talked to who are running right now, like Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger, in Virginia, they do campaign like that. They do find people who say, my business has a much higher overhead now thanks to Trump, and they do elevate them. So you're correct, at least as seen by Democratic campaigning.
Yeah, and I guess the ultimate question is, how long can Trump kind of defy gravity, to use a phrase from Wicked? Like there's this Republican messaging operation and their extensive media network that they have, and Trump's just willingness to lie can all kind of defy gravity for a little while. But if you, like me, think that, well, tariffs are pretty bad and they are going to have pretty bad consequences, and, kicking out a bunch of immigrants is also going to have negative economic consequences. Number one, I guess, how quickly does that all materialize? in terms of job numbers, in terms of inflation, in terms of what people feel, in their everyday experience. But then when it does materialize, can the messaging strategy keep them afloat for long enough to not have a disaster in the midterms? That is a big unanswered question for me. Like, to what extent does reality smack you in the face, and to what extent can you defy reality?
Yeah, I think at the moment, this is still in the period where historically presidents are doing better. And one thing that I feel, if you're a liberal who's annoyed at your TV, it's fair to be annoyed that the coverage of Trump's poll numbers is in relation to his first term and not to other presidents. So he does get covered at 45% approval, the way that Joe Biden got covered at 55% approval. And some of this is through the media storytelling of why Trump voters are sticking with him, less than there was before. I think the idea that somebody voting for Donald Trump is such a fascinating human interest story that you need to find out everyone who did it. That's faded a bit in the second term. But how much could it hold on? I just think, yeah, it depends on if these things change. It depends on whether people stay gloomy about the economy and they don't see benefits from tariffs. Because the flip side of this is Democrats are not saying elect us and we'll get rid of all the tariffs. When I asked them what they would do, like, okay, would you take the power of the president away on tariffs? Would you make it so that a future Democratic president can't just say, we're going to conflict with China on steel, and we're going to put tariffs on them? And they don't say yes. They do like this tactic. This is why it's effective. That Republicans have taken something that usually only Democrats would do, but they're doing it without the capital strike that the left expects when they do something like this. You're not seeing companies line up at the Chamber of Commerce outside the White House to say how awful the tariffs are. You're seeing them beg the president for handouts, and that's pretty cool if you're for a lot of voters. There is this big discrepancy. Democrats see what Trump is doing and have memories, I think, of how Barack Obama was accused of being a tyrant for expanding healthcare, putting healthcare requirements on people. They can't believe that the entire Republican apparatus is fine with what Trump is doing, but it is. Like, in the short term, it is. Maybe the long term, it is decided that it is worth ditching whatever the party used to stand for in order to do this, and the only cost comes if it doesn't work. If come October next year things are worse and people say Trump didn't fix it, and just if you're a Democrat, not much you can control on that. You can just vote against it.
So, with all this said, I'm curious what you think the national environment would need to be for Democrats to get certain outcomes. Because a lot of my friends that I talk to are worried about gerrymandering. They're worried about Republican malfeasance. The more panicky ones are questioning whether we're even going to have elections or not. Trump's just going to not let us have elections, which, like, I would call them conspiracy theorists. But I mean, I nothing feels out of the question anymore. But we will probably have elections. But is it enough if the Democrats are winning the popular vote nationally, say the House popular vote, by 2 points? Is that actually enough to win the House back? Do you think they need to win it by more? I'm curious, like, if what your perception is of, like, how impactful is gerrymandering going to be, and, like, where's the line for victory actually at?
That is going to be determined by how the districts are redrawn. Right now, a 2% Democratic advantage nationwide would not do it, because how does that translate? For example, in Texas under the current map, you lose the districts that were drawn to be safely Republican by a little bit less. That doesn't get you anything. Does it help you hold on to all the seats that Kamala Harris lost by 1 point? Yeah, totally. And Republicans are still targeting those. They will for most of the election. But if you're a Democrat who survived while Harris was losing your district last year, I think Jared Golden is the one Democrat. Jared Golden and Marie Gillis-Kemper are the ones that Republicans are targeting the most, and they just know they're not going to have a bunch of Trump voters coming out. But yes, we need to see what the full map looks like, because the goal of this redistricting, again, it's state by state, making it very hard for cities to elect Democrats, or maybe more than one Democrat, squeeze them all into one district in the city. It's just, that's immune to a big electoral shift. That would make it so that a 10-point Democratic victory gives you the same seats as a 1-point Democratic loss. That's the point of gerrymandering. So we just don't know yet.
There's another interesting thing with gerrymandering where you're right that, like, with enough gerrymandering, like D+4 and D+8 would be essentially the same result because those 4 points don't get you anything. But then it's like there's a certain point by which everything starts to fall down. If you go from D+8 to D+11, it might be the case that you win another 40 or 50 districts because they've all been gerrymandered by about 10 points and they all start to fall at once. Like there's kind of a tipping point where the gerrymander fails catastrophically all at once. Now, the problem is to get to that point, you have to be in a really, really good environment. You have to be in like a 2008 level kind of tidal wave. But I think most indications are that we would not get there with the current, unless something really dramatic happens.
Yeah, it would take something dramatic. Look at the 2010 results. Again, the key thing there is just that turnout fell off a cliff. There were in 2010 and 2014 before Trump led the GOP, Democratic turnout would fall off a cliff in midterm elections. The Obama coalition was very hard to turn out in anything but a presidential. And you saw stuff, just seats that were plus 20 for Obama. One I remember is the late Raul Grijalva's district in Tucson in southern Arizona, unlosable, and they almost lost it just because Democrats said this sucks, and they didn't tear around and vote again. They're not going to have that situation. It's going to be people like Mike Lawler right now. It looks like he's in a tough race. If it's a breakaway midterm, he'd lose his seat if it's not redrawn by 10 points. But that would be, I think, effective. Things getting worse and Republicans not turning out. And Republicans, they're not standing still. They're aware that they will have a tough time turning Trump voters out. This is a very good area to be in as a consultant. If you're a Republican saying you're trying to figure out a way to get the MAGA voter to turn out in every election, you're going to get some money because that is the problem they're trying to fix. And that it's more known, I think, that fewer Trump voters will come out next year than it is what districts will look like. If you're a Democrat, what you can do in the meantime is recruit candidates everywhere, which they're trying to do. Maine is the exception. Maine is such an exception that it gets a lot of the attention. But they're getting people running basically in the sort of seats that would flip if it is a landslide midterm. So some people are going to get stranded on the rocks. That always happens. Some good candidates who can't quite make it. They've convinced people who narrowly lost last time to run again, or if they were crappy candidates, they've convinced them not to run. They've got their candidates, but Republicans are doing is raising a ton of money, also registering voters, which they've gotten better at over the years. Partly after passing laws that made it harder for independent groups to register for Democrats, which is how Democrats used to do that. That's the entire Accord story in 2009 was about that. But yeah, they're finding more people who are willing to align with the Republican Party. And do they all come out and vote in a midterm? That's determined by if things suck or not. And what's the campaign going to look like? It is possible to imagine a Republican campaign that looks a lot like Trump's in 2024 and runs a bunch of ads on the themes he ran on, like Joe Biden being a failure, or Democrats care about they, them, not you. And it just doesn't work because those aren't the issues anymore. That's possible, but they're just trying to make themselves robust against that by raising a lot of money, keeping their incumbents in these races, and by gerrymandering. Just trying to. And when we were talking about, I think we talked briefly about Democrats, how they're discussing the threat to democracy from all this. Another theme at this convention I was at Netroots, that is already a discussion among Democrats, is if the country is, they end up with a country where they can win the popular vote for a House big time, and they cannot win the House. That's basically the situation in North Carolina. It's also the situation in Hungary, where the opposition party can't really ever win. So what do they do in that position? One option is the party needs to force itself to move to the right, which would be painful, which would alienate a lot of people in the base who, again, think that you're throwing them under the bus if you do that. The other is just not winning. And so what does that do for them? So it's possible to imagine a Democratic victory next year. It's also possible to imagine a loss that compounds how depressed they are about the idea they can never win again.
Well, that is a grim vision of the future for probably the listeners of this podcast, but I think it just underscores that, the stakes are pretty high right now. We're coming up on time, so I will close with the traditional question that we always ask as our final question here. And that is, what would you recommend for people who want to learn more, who are interested in the things we're talking about, the dynamics we're talking about, the 2026 contest? I will obviously recommend that everyone should go follow Dave Weigel. He's writing at Semafor. He's got a long history of covering this stuff. He's been around the country a million times. He's talked to a million voters and politicians. You should go follow Dave's work. Follow him on social media. Subscribe to Semafor. All that good stuff. But I'm happy to recommend you. But other than your own writing, what would you recommend for people who want to stay informed about the stuff we're talking about here now?
Well, for media, probably stuff that they're already aware of. The Bulwark has been very good. The Bulwark, I feel, is uh, beats the competition even when it comes to covering Democratic Party politics, which I try to cover very closely. Uh, I would bolt the news site for not just down ballot races, but for an analysis of everything down to sheriff's races, trends in city elections. Just a really good and non-sensational, but not in a boring way, not nonsense, but just in a way that every story is not based on some crime that just happened or some flashy event. It is very Bolts is this probably the most useful local political news site, and then the down ballot news site, which is based on the team that built a very good political reporting operation at Daily Coast, the blog Daily Coast. They spun off their own thing called the Down Ballot last year, and it's great. That is very, very strong for tracking electoral developments around the country in a more horse race way. But you need some of the horse race coverage. You saw this with the gerrymandering discussion, is that a lot of people jumped into gerrymandering discussion and went on TV and talked about it, and they didn't know how different states' laws worked. So it's good to have these sites that are granular and cover stuff closely. And if you're interested in just Democrats and the the fights that we were talking about, the ideological fights, the two books I'd recommend would be John Judas and Rita Teixeira's book "Where Have All the Democrats Gone," which came out at a moment of real dread for the party. They were writing these essays. Teixeira and Judas wrote the emerging Democratic majority in the Bush years, and over time, the part of that book about suburbs and college towns become more democratic came true. Other parts backslid. Their follow-up, which did not sell as well, but is very good, is about how the parties moved to the extremes on culture and how it's cost them. The other book I'd recommend, which I really has really been useful for my understanding of what it is Republicans are trying to get out of the not just the discourse, get out of law, get out of America, period, is The Origins of Woke, is Richard Hanania's book, which is entirely about civil rights law, including anti-discrimination, anti-sexual harassment law. It's just a very good veil-lifting study of the legal regime that Democrats created, not just Democrats, judges, just progressives were used to for 50 years. And conservatives have been very open-eyed about trying to blow it up. Trying to undermine that, trying to undo everything. I don't think all of them understand exactly how it's worked. And that book is a very good roadmap for, okay, the magic wand that they are waving, the people that they're appointing in the administration, the things they're getting rid of, this is why they're getting rid of them, is because they think you guys built it and they need to destroy it. So those two books, I think, are very illuminating about the Democratic Party's problems and the Republican strategy, which they're willing to do even if there's a bad story about it. Bad story in the media, that's great. That means they're doing they're doing the right thing if they're getting the media and different interest groups angry about them and accusing them of fascism. That's the way to make sure they do it faster.
All right. Well, one more time, I want to say thank you to my guest today, Dave Weigel. Thanks so much for coming on the show, man.
It was awesome. Thank you.